Have you ever wondered what having multiple partners could be like? And have you ever wondered why it could work? Welcome to Multi-Loving Model, the channel that shows you how to manage multiple interests, multiple relationships, and multiple approaches to finance. My name is Gerald, and I help people to navigate their way through life, love, and learning in order to customize their happiness in life. If this is your first time watching this video, welcome. And if you've been around before, I hope this video is going to see you well. Today is Flirty Freedom Friday, and the topic I have today is why polyamory? So why even bother with polyamory at all? So let's start with the definitions. So for example, polyamory under Wikipedia says that it is the practice of or desire for intimate relationships with more than one partner with the consent of all partners involved. For myself, I would also add the caveat that also pertains to the ability, age, and active consent of all the parties involved. So for example, I can have multiple partners and they can also have multiple partners besides myself. So it's not just one-sided, it's not just myself, my partners as well. And the basic thing is that as long as all the affected parties are able, of age, and they are actively consenting, the relationships can actually proceed from there. Now I'm sure there are plenty of other definitions for polyamory, but this is just what I'm working off as of right now. What about yourself? What is your definition of polyamory? And how have you seen it work in practice? Let me know down in the comment sections below. So let's see whether polyamory actually applies to you. For example, have you ever been interested in more than one person at once? Have you ever perhaps felt like you wanted to be in another relationship? And do you ever wonder whether the traditional relationship escalator is the right model for you to use? If you've answered positively to any of the questions, well, polyamory is something that you might want to actually learn a little bit more about. Before I begin, I want to get the disclaimer out of the way. I am not saying that polyamory is for everybody. I'm not saying that everybody ought to be polyamorous. I'm not saying everybody should be polyamorous. I'm just saying that there are some people for whom polyamory would be a better choice, and for some people, polyamory may not be a very good choice at all. And it comes down to the individual on that matter. And so I am not saying that you should do it, but I'm saying everyone should actually at least learn a little bit more about polyamory before making up their minds. So some things to think about. What if we were free to love? What if we did not feel like we were holding ourselves back if we were already in an existing relationship? What would it be like if we could handle our jealousy well? What if we were able to manage it and not even use it as a kind of yardstick to measure how much someone actually loves us? What if the relationship doesn't quite work out and instead of taking a complete clean break from each other, we instead let the relationship evolve naturally into where it wants to go? What if we could be with partners based on the strengths that they bring into the relationship rather than deciding as a whole whether their strengths are good enough for a relationship? So these are my thoughts on the matter. I've already mentioned that I don't necessarily think that polyamory is for everybody, right? There's plenty of reasons why people might not want to be polyamorous, but for the people who are polyamorous or for whom polyamory would be a good fit for them, this would actually be something beneficial to really consider as a lifestyle. And we also have to understand that this is a kind of relationship kind of standard, right? So whereas some people are just really strictly polyamorous, other people are also very strictly monoamorous or monogamous, if you will. And of course, there are also people for whom they're not interested in having a romantic relationship as well. So those aren't asexual, they're just non-romantic people. Or maybe you could call them not interested in a relationship. And this is also an entire spectrum, right? So on one hand, you have people who are completely monogamous. So they stick to one person and one person only for their entire lives. And then that's it. They're not interested in anybody else. But on the other side, you also have people who are just fully polyamorous and they're able to love anyone and everyone, right? So in a sense, this is similar to the concept of pansexuals where they're just attracted to anything and anyone. And then there are also folks who are not interested in having a romantic relationship. So for these particular folks, they would be most akin to the asexuals, whereas most other people are actually interested in sex, these asexual folks, they are not interested in having sex at all. They might be okay with going through the act, but it doesn't really hold that much significance for themselves. So it is the same way for polyamory. Everything falls on a spectrum, and where you fall on that relating spectrum is what determines whether you're monogamous or polyamorous. Another thing that I want to point out is that polyamory is not the same as polygamy. This is something that I'm going to cover in a later video, but polygamy has a lot of drawbacks. There's a lot of complications that go into making polyamory legal. And so for myself, I'm actually not in favor of polygamy at all. I think that if you want to marry, you should marry one person. But at the same time, if you only marry one person, that kind of creates a power dynamic between the person who was married and your partners who are not married. So that's not something which I personally agree with, and that is why for myself, I do not agree with marriage for myself. I'm not saying that marriage no longer applies for everybody. No, marriage can work, but not for me. And with that said, just because something is legally complicated does not mean that it's not worthwhile investigating. For example, certain kinds of investments are really complicated. There's a lot of legalese that goes into the background and things like that, but that doesn't mean that they're not worth it. I would also like to comment that as an empath, one thing that I actually want more of in this world is for people to be happy when other people are happy. This in polyamory is known as compersion, where you feel happiness from the joy of other people. So let's say my partner just had a promotion at work. Well, instead of just sulking and, thinking that, I'm not measuring up enough, because I haven't got a promotion. I'm not keeping pace with her. Instead, I can just sit back and I can just be happy in the fact that she actually got a promotion. She's happy, and because of that happiness, a lot of it is actually pouring out of her, and then I'm just taking it in. I'm absorbing that happiness energy, and I get happiness because she feels happy. Polyamory is a way of training the mind so that you actually gain this kind of happiness. That's not to say that jealousy never appears as head. That's not to say that jealousy will never appear. That is not true at all. Jealousy will appear, but in a polyamorous relationship, jealousy is something that you have to work on actively to really manage it in such a way that it doesn't affect the lives of yourself or your different partners. So that is one advantage of, I think, polyamory. Another great thing that I find about polyamory is that because you have more than one partner, you actually have a lot of support when times are going bad. So for example, if let's say that all of you have children, right, and you want one parent to stay behind and the rest go to work, number one, it allows you to bring in a lot more income because a lot more people are going out to work, a lot more people are bringing back the dough, and you have just a small number of people who are at home taking care of the kids. As compared to the stereotypical one male, one female kind of household, wherein perhaps the man goes out to work and the female stays behind and takes care of the children, this way you have one person bringing in two people's income. Whereas in a polyamorous relationship where perhaps there are four people, so let's say there are two males and two females and they're all interconnected, let's just say, right? So this would be a quad relationship, definitions aside. Let's say one person stays back, so perhaps the man stays back because he wants to. So the man stays back and he takes care of the children, and the other three go out and work. So in this particular case, instead of one person supporting two people, now you have three people supporting four. And so the financial burden is a lot lesser. The other part also comes in. So for example, what if a person falls ill? In a traditional relationship, one man, one woman, well, if one person falls ill, it kind of boils down to the other person to do pretty much everything else. Let's say that the woman goes down in a fever, right? So she's bedridden, she's delirious whatsoever, there's 39 degrees Celsius, or I don't know what's the Fahrenheit, honestly. I don't know, right? Well, what's the man to do? Well, he's now in charge of all the laundry, of all the cooking, of all the cleaning, and taking care of the kids, and working, and this and that. So basically, this other person becomes a single parent, functionally. Whereas contrast this in a polyamorous relationship where, let's take that same four people, if let's say two of them go down, one person can still take care of them and take care of the kids, right? So they maintain the household, whereas the other person is the one who's going out and taking care and making sure that the money is coming in. Now, admittedly, this places a larger financial burden on that person. Because now instead of one person supporting two, now you have one person supporting four people. Oh goodness. But here's the thing. If two people came down ill in a traditional household, no one will be able to work. Whereas in a polyamorous relationship, if you have people who are ill, and you of course do the necessary steps to quarantine them and things like that, the financial situation isn't that bad. And it's not just financial, it's also the emotional support. If one partner's parents pass away, that's a mouthful, then the rest of them can actually help to gather together to give that emotional support to this person. Now, that's not to say that it's necessarily going to be effective unless there's somebody trained in counseling or psychology or whatever it is. All I'm saying is when one person's parents passes away in a traditional relationship, the other person has to be the emotional pillar. If both partners' parents pass away, who's going to support who? Whereas in a polyamorous relationship, if you have multiple people's parents who pass away, maybe they got on a coach ride together and they all passed away. Even so, there's generally going to be a few people left over who can behave, who can function as the emotional pillars temporarily while the others are recovering from this shock. A traditional relationship does not have that kind of built-in flexibility. So this is one thing which I find easier in a polyamorous relationship. The last thing also, which is also tied to the last point, is that when you have more heads together, you get a larger problem-solving capability. When you have more heads tackling the problem of whether it's parenting or finance or actually starting a business or whatever it is, when you have more people on board, it is easier to bounce ideas off each other and to get feedback and to really have that proper great support to really bring that thing forward. That's not to say that this doesn't happen in a traditional relationship, but in a traditional relationship, generally speaking, it's the man and the woman coming together and bouncing ideas off each other. And that's it. And that can still work fine, especially if the two of you really complement each other. But in a polyamorous relationship, where people have different ideas, differing views, they come from different perspectives, and they have different considerations, each person who voices out their opinions gives you an insight into the various kinds of things that you have to pay attention to. And that's why when more people gather together as if it were a mastermind, you get things done a lot quicker. And that is one of the benefits which I find is prevalent in the polyamorous relationships. Now, I also understand, as a last passing thought, as much as I say polyamory can work, you have to be careful of which kind of polyamorous families you're getting into. And this is something that I will cover in another video. If you get involved in a polyamorous cult, that's a whole different story than a healthy, functioning polyamorous relationship. So keep in mind that as much as I'm saying polyamory, I'm also referring to healthy polyamory. Healthy polyamory has strict standards and criteria for its members, and if the members do not meet up to that criteria, they will unfortunately have to be let go. And that is very key and very important to take note in a healthy polyamorous polycule. So what do you think? Why do people get into polyamorous relationships? Let me know down in the comment sections below. And if this video has been interesting or helpful to you, why not give me a like? Hit that like button. If you like more content about how to handle multiple interests, multiple relationships, and multiple approaches to finance, consider subscribing to the channel. And then if you want notifications of when the uploads are, you can also click on the notification button. So that's it for this video. Next week on Flirty Freedom Friday, we are going to be covering the freedom to love. My name is Gerald, and this is Multi-Loving Model. Be happy in diversity. Cheers. If one partner's parents pass away, that's a mouthful. That's a mouthful. If one partner's parents passed away, wow, that's a mouthful. If one partner's parents passed away, then the rest of them can actually help to gather together to give that emotional support to this person.